think we'll continue to see them intersect in a host of ways that can benefit society.
If I may disagree slightly, very respectfully, and mind you also, totally respectfully, and mind you, I'm also in a sort of a unique position because New Frontier Data is completely neutral and unbiased, and we really cannot take a position in movement or advocacy or others, so we kind of constricted to what we can speak to. If we don't have data to talk about it, we basically can't talk about it, which means I can't talk about it. But in terms of two things, the women aspect, obviously very dear to me. I am a woman. But my argument would be like, well, it is true, we absolutely need more women in technology and cannabis. I would say we need more women in technology, period.
Yes.
And candidly,
definitely.
in the cannabis industry, we have more women in business and in leadership positions than in any other industry in the world.
Yes.
And certainly in the United States. So that's something to be proud of. And it is our job, women in the industry today, to continue to mentor and create opportunities for women that do want to enter it, including in technology. And then as far as the particular mention that, we do have a broken down system when it comes to technology, that may be so, but I wouldn't blame technologists or the technology sector. I would blame regulators.
Yes.
Because while we don't have a federal system, that is true, we do have state systems that could absolutely mandate more streamlined and more symbiotic solutions that would actually work well. That information, that technology, and those standards exist in pretty much every other industry. And there are many mature industries that do need to use various solutions for their various aspects. It is not the only industry where you have one solution for compliance and one solution for point of sale solution, so on and so forth. The problem is that we don't have standards and we don't have mandates and regulation that force those companies to actually speak to each other and work together.
To an extent, I mean, if I could respond to that, I mean, what we were talking about, I think, was take a Bamboo HR, for example. They are dropping cannabis businesses. You cannot get a 401k plan for your employees if you're in the cannabis industry. You cannot use a lot of these very basic things that businesses are used to using because these companies choose not to work with the cannabis industry. Regulators aside,
in the cannabis industry for that know-how to come in.
But unfortunately, we're not seeing the companies step in that are appropriately responding to that in a way that is best for businesses. We are fraught with snake oil salesmen in the cannabis industry. And for every 10 products on the market, 9 are bullshit, to be frank.
That is unfortunate.
And we, unfortunately, in the cannabis industry, sure, the states don't mandate it, but they also don't know any better. And it's driven a lot by industry, no doubt, as well, where you do have an industry that does not work well together, that is very divided, not just on how the industry should be grown, right? You have very financially driven interests in the cannabis industry, publicly traded companies being one of those. That's one of the reasons that the Minority Cannabis Business Association, we're very fearful of federal legalization happening right now. I'm personally opposed to the STATES Act, right? I have businesses in 14 different states, and the STATES Act would benefit my businesses in a very great way. But if you cement these awful state policies that we have right now that are inequitable, that are not managing businesses appropriately, that are over-regulating these businesses in the wrong way, then we're essentially endorsing these poor state policies and allowing this big money to come in and invest in the cannabis industry and grow this inequity. It's not going to be just another, or it's not going to be a different industry, I think, like a lot of us want it to. It's going to end up being just the same industry. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but the point has to be made that there's a lot of people, whether you're a regulator or a business owner or an advocate, that are doing a huge disservice to this industry right now by really making it driven solely by money. Or the liability potentially associated with jumping in the industry right now because it's not federally.
So, Kayvon, what you're saying is absolutely true. And what we haven't said is that the technology that does perform, let's say mediocre, because I think that's where we are in terms of like operators, that there is a surplus of what we have to pay for that. Even for bad technology, for a small business owner to pay the price, which we are known in the industry, you pay the marijuana marijuana tax on everything. And so where even with banking, if you have a bank account and spend $15 for your account, we're spending at least $2,000. So, and we don't get to write that off as a 280E issue. We're really subjugated. So if you think about what that looks like for a minority owner as myself that had to bootstrap my whole operation, pay out of pocket, and then I have to pay on top of that all these different marijuana taxes, how can I survive with big companies coming in and being able to just dish out this money and pay exorbitant amounts for advertisements that are not conventional, that integrate the AI technology, et cetera, that I don't have access to because I don't have the financial resources. So again, the industry is formulating to something that removes a minority, a woman from this industry and puts it back. We're not calling it big pharma now, but big cannabis. So those are some of the issues we're encountering every day.
Let's talk global competition and trade. So as we're seeing more countries legalize and decriminalize, Canada just last year, to what extent does that put pressure on the U.S. to do the same?
So it puts pressure on the U.S., but really I look at the U.S. as the nucleus of what the rest of the world will kind of follow. What we will do here is really what the rest of the world will still trend. I think that we'll have the biggest market. Giada, is that fair to say by your numbers? So we don't know yet.
I do, but please finish your thought.
So, but again, so my perception on Canada, I think we're talking about here was a $2 billion industry where the U.S. is a $10 billion. And I think that we're still doing what we're supposed to within our confinements. Let me explain that a little bit. So you have Oregon, which has a surplus of medical marijuana. If that is legalized in comparison to a state like North Carolina that has not even started in the cannabis industry, and we create this federal legalization, all of a sudden, all California and possibly Oregon can then sell products in North Carolina where local economies cannot emerge. And so when I look at that, I have to really think about what's best for the people and the people in those states and what that looks like in terms of federal legalization and then how it will impact the rest of the world. So for me, I say let's stay here where we are, deal with our internal issues, but when the time comes, the U.S. will emerge as the biggest provider of cannabis to the world, but it's just not time yet.
So I certainly do not disagree with all of that. I'll give some facts. So the United States is by far, of course, one of the most mature and larger market today. But here's the issue. There is a big world outside of the United States, and they haven't snoozed. And they don't have the same challenge. They're not facing the same challenges that we are facing in the United States due to the cannabis not being federally legal. So when it comes to research, when it comes to import and exports, when it comes to trading with other markets, obviously we're limited. Now with the Farm Bill and hemp, maybe that will change. When it comes just to demand, the United States has about 87 billion in demand. But well, guess what? Asia has 133 billion. So it remains to be seen sort of what the largest market will be. It remains to be seen what the role of the United States will be. And believe me, I know who I'm rooting for, so that it's not that I'm disagreeing or my heart is not in it. But from a factual perspective, the truth of the matter is that it's not as rosy as we want it to be. If we don't get our act together from a state perspective and they regulate things in a manner that allows businesses to compete and for technology to enter, and if the federal government does not get their act together and actually agrees on a way to federally regulate it and be able to give access to money and banking, and then takes a seat on the global trade space, well, the rest of the world continues to move. And they are moving very fast. Europe, I mean, even just from our perspective as running a business, New Frontier Data, the type of business we're seeing emerging from Europe versus the United States, it's not even remotely comparable. I mean, that's just one business. Mm-hmm. So I think we must be optimistic, but we must be responsible, and we must be truthful to the realities that we're facing.
Giada, who's the #1 exporter right now of cannabis in the world?
I'd say Canada. I mean, not many people are exporting, period.
Right. And so
and Canada is importing from Colombia. So it's really interesting.
I think it puts definitely some good pressure on us, but I think regardless of the pressure, that the United States is going to federally legalize in the next 2 years, 3 years. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens in Donald Trump's first presidency. Still, even if it's something like the States Act passing that defers to states, but I think the point is no country has gone far enough, has like leapfrogged us to the point that the United States can't catch up like that. I mean, if Canada is the largest exporter, I think I read that it's like 3,000 pounds a year that they export. My little tiny business in Nevada, and I say little tiny compared to all the others there, produces more than that every year in one business. So Canada's not exactly killing it in the export game right now. So compared to what the market size is.
That's true. I mean, their market size is only $2 billion. So.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think the United States, just like it does in a lot of other consumer products, is going to set a lot of trends. I think that's why California was so important to get on board and to start bringing some professionalism and some level playing field associated with their market, because we are going to see those consumer brands that I think are going to be known across the country, across the world here before too long. When you look at food and clothing and all of that, I mean, the United States still does set that trend in a big way, and I don't think cannabis is going to be any different personally. So regardless of what we have as far as our internal consumption and those numbers associated with it, I would agree that I think we're going to export a great deal because this is where brands are made.
I think an earlier panel mentioned laboratories of democracy. And when I grew up, I thought about the 50 different states as 50 laboratories of democracy. But I think your question reminded me that each country gives us an opportunity, whether it's with respect to this policy or in economics. Do you want to be North Korea or South Korea? It's not just a theory. You can look and see what works. So I don't know how much of it is, some of it's putting pressure on us probably, but some of it, as somebody who's kind of on the outside, is, well, we can see what other countries are doing, and does it seem to be working or not? Is it catastrophe? Is it fantastic? And then hopefully we can learn from that.
I'll add something, not to be argumentative.
Please.
We entered the business. I found the company in 2014. May of 2014 is when I first heard about cannabis. I mean, I didn't even think pot, which is what we still called it ignorantly at the time, was a market or a business. And it was because Maryland had just announced that they were going to put out licenses. We've been tracking since 2014 to now the evolution of the United States from an industry, and I cannot disagree with you in terms of everything that you said, but I will bring attention to this. In half of the time, 55 countries have come to market. So I'm just saying, we need to be, I agree with everything you said, but it doesn't hurt. You know, as a company, we take great pride in reporting the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it sucks sometimes to have to be the one to talk about the ugly. But I do think that we do absolutely have to be cognizant of what's happening outside of our borders, despite the fact that we absolutely are at the peak and the forefront today. But let's make sure we are at the forefront tomorrow, too.
And just one more question before the audience. I want to talk about the state-by-state legalization approach. How has that impacted international trade?
Well, because we can export, import, et cetera, it has a direct impact. But what we'll see is a lot of American-based companies are now exchanging on the Canadian exchange and going public that route. So we do know that has impacted in terms of when we look at the global perspective and why everyone's going public on the Canadian exchange. But I still will say that as we emerge internally, we're still rising pretty strong with our infrastructure. We see that from state to state, the licenses used to be opened up to maybe 20 or so. Now they're reducing down to 5. Some states are just 2. So again, it's like, because the sophistication of the technology in terms of growing and being able to form, I'm gonna say these different, some states duopolies or multi-state operators are kicking in, that really we're getting a lot more sophisticated, and therefore when it's time where we do go federally legal, it will switch back over into the United States. And when we're exchanging publicly on the US exchange, it's gonna be ginormous. But we're just using Canada as our playing ground as a bad word to say that we're going to bring it back home when it's time. It's just that we don't have that ability right now.
Right now, Canadians are being precluded sometimes from coming into the United States if they're in the cannabis industry up there, if that's what they're putting at the border as the reason for coming over here, that they're in the cannabis industry, which is unfortunate. Far more unfortunate is the fact that it's really negatively impacting legal immigrants in this country. You have folks that are legal immigrants that are working in the cannabis industry that are getting deported. This just got light shined on it in Colorado in a big way, and is no doubt happening in other parts of the country, especially as California and Florida build their markets. I think you're going to see that become an even larger problem. But also looking at the, even our state-by-state framework that we have, it's put a lot of pressure on cannabis illegally coming into the country. I mean, there's been endless stories done about the kind of Mexican influence in cannabis in the United States is pretty much, I mean, it's still there, but it's a heck of a lot less than it was before Colorado and Washington kicked off legalization. So it impacts it in a lot of ways, but I go back to really truly believing that in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to have federal legalization in the United States, and all of it, it will serve as that laboratory for democracy, that these different states, they're all messing up right now. None of them are regulating appropriately. Even a state like California that has had the previous examples of a couple dozen states to try to get this right is proving in their implementation right now that they're failing miserably to accomplish everything that they want to in the time that they want to. So it's probably pretty good at the end of the day that we're having all of these mistakes made in all these states get out in front and start to test how we actually are going to regulate this at the federal level when the time comes.
So I do have a comment, and you said something that actually struck home with me. So when you think about policies that are formed that keeps one population, a vulnerable population, oppressed, like immigration, where even immigrants or permanent citizens that have that designation here in the United States, that once they work in the cannabis industry can lose the possibility of citizenship and even be deported. Again, these are the policies that oppress communities. So I think about, again, why aren't minorities in this industry? It's because we've had policies against our population to keep us out. And we still haven't had those policies removed. So then that's why you see this small little number of minority participants, because it's a broad generalization of policies that affect us. If you're on public housing and you consume cannabis with the card, you can lose your public housing. So again, why are we targeted? And I say that because this is my community. This is what we represent. I think about my mothers that have given their children medical marijuana so that they could literally live, and they have had their children removed from them. Why are you targeting mothers? How can you even question a mother's willingness to save her child's life when there's something that works for them? So don't target vulnerable populations. This is a time where we need to push back and think about, all right, give us our rights and entitlement and the equal playing field so we all can participate fairly.
On that note, do we have any questions out there from the audience? There's mics, I think, on both sides.
Can't see.
Hello? My question is, do you all see cannabis science being entered into the STEMs for academic purposes in the school system, starting in middle school? In my mind, I'm looking at middle school and high school, because I went to a land-grant institution that has an accelerated program for the high school into the college classes and courses for STEMs. I feel like cannabis science being integrated into the STEMs in the school system will be able to keep America keeping up with the rest of the world. Do you all see that coming, or?
Definitely, and I'll speak a little bit on that. So the Harlem Business Alliance is honoring me on May 1st for my work in STEAM education. So that is science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Now, why is a Black organization of business owners saying that I would be awarded? Because by profession, I'm a biomedical researcher. And I do believe in a former director of STEM education at Howard University. So do you know that there are only 9 medical schools in the country that will educate physicians on the endocannabinoid system? And so now we have to bring that education not only from a physician level, but incorporate it so the patients know how to use this medicine, how it impacts their bodies, because those are the things that we don't know. So when I think about STEM education or STEAM, it is imperative that it's a part of our basic learning, like sex education. We think about what we're taught about different forms of medicinal medicine. This is just another extension of it and should be respected as such.
Great question.
Hey, so the panel has been talking a lot about marijuana exporting from the United States. Historically speaking, the United States has exported the drug war. Our policies have been copied by other countries, largely because we've forced them to do so. Also, historically speaking, the US has gone into other countries, such as the Philippines, South America, and forced our capital into their countries. Our businesses have taken control of their economies because we have inherent advantages. When talking about cannabis legalization, it would be really unfortunate for us to legalize cannabis and then force other states to do that and then not allow them to build their own investments and instead start exporting cannabis and have our companies taking over their markets. How can we effectively advocate for regulations that would prevent that, that would allow them to build their own equity rather than us just exporting to them?
I think it's one of the conundrums that we're dealing with right now. I would love for cannabis to be legal today in this country so that 550,000 people that are still going to jail every year for simple cannabis possession don't, right? That is, even as we're talking about all these dollars that are being made in the cannabis industry, we are not talking about the more than 500,000 people that still go to jail every year. Often in the cannabis industry, they don't talk about it. I know you do, James. I know I do. But unless we, and this is why what I think we do at the Minority Cannabis Business Association is so important, is frankly, want to thwart federal legalization or the States Act from passing unless it has equitable language in it right now, unless it has reinvestment priorities set for communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs right now. That has to happen before that legalization happens. And I would hope, if that does happen, if we're able to win that fight, that that's a precursor to that larger conversation that you're talking about, because we did create prohibition. The United States created it for the world. You know, we did push those policies down their throats and require these people to do it for a myriad of reasons. I'm sure you could probably talk to that about some of the trade issues. But unless we start at home here and actually look in the mirror and fix that first, I think it's going to be very difficult for this industry to be anything different than all of these other extractive corporate industries are in how United States companies behave across the world, unfortunately.
And I think it's important to get it right off the bat, because what I've seen from trade policy is once you get a bad policy in place, it's hard to get rid of. If you were going to start from scratch, a lot of times these policies would never be put in place. Like in the United States, we pay about twice the world price for sugar because the sugar producers in Florida are very politically powerful. So if you're a candy manufacturer, you have to move to Mexico or Canada to get your sugar to be competitive on the world market. So it'll be very fascinating to see how it shakes out, how much is produced in the US versus abroad. I don't have some of the same concerns maybe that some people do about foreign investment. I know looking at Colombia, for example, American investors created the opportunity for them to grow and sell flowers to the United States, and I view that as mutually beneficial under the right framework. Like that framework's really important, and again, I would just say it's important to try and get it right from the start.
So I'm going to jump in because we're talking about policy again. I think I demonstrated how policy has oppressed different communities here. So when you think about your question in a greater sense, how are we going to affect the policy that you would like to see implemented? Well, one, we don't have the power. Two, we don't have the influence, and we don't have the power influence because we don't have the money. So again, we have to find a grassroots approach to participate and be a part of these programs when legislation is being created, where policy is being created, but a lot of us are just not aware that we can be participants in that. So that is definitely a grassroots approach so that we can have, as Kayvon said, like, for example, the States Act. If we had some type of policy that could represent minorities in that, that would be wonderful for us. But we have to fight for that. They're just not going to give it to us. And that's why we have to come together and say, look, we're looking for these things to be incorporated. So if you could tell us how to do it, maybe the people in this room that are watching this will start to take that and become active so it won't impact other people or populations that it will directly hurt.
We just have time for one more quick question.
So a lot of this panel talked about legalization as the key to kind of this industry growing, but I actually feel like education for patients and physicians is really the key to make this market really exponentially grow. If you think about all the patient populations out there that don't even understand how this medicine can be used therapeutically, and you think about the patients that actually need this medicine every day, large amounts of it, and some of them for the rest of their lives, don't you think that education, science, research is really the key to kind of growing this market?
Definitely. Yes. I can't even start to say how important that is. So when we think about Washington, D.C. and the dispensaries here, I can say I hold the market. Why? Because we focus on that education. The education of one ailment that is aligned to a particular strain and form of medicine. Each patient has to physically opt in into being educated and consulted on their condition to know that they're being treated for something specific. This is real medicine and should be respected as that. But because there is the lack of education, as we heard previously, this is why there's a big gap and patients are not being treated the way they're supposed to. So the education needs to be there. The problem is that it's not respected.
Well, one of the issues is chicken or egg thing too. Without legalization, we can't get the institutions, I think, that we would normally expect to do this kind of research in the United States on board with doing it, right? If they do, they generate these sidecar nonprofits that are often ill-funded, or they get funded by some big player in the cannabis industry that manages somehow to maneuver that study into their own personal gain or financial gain that they have. So we really need that legalization to come. Unfortunately, I think when that does happen, as we've been talking about, then you have large money flood in, and just like we've seen in the pharmaceutical industry, the research really is almost not as important because the money is more important. They use research as an excuse to continue funneling money and to charge more for the drugs that they have. We need to find a different way of doing things. We can't continue to go the same route and allow the same institutions to manage the research that we're doing on cannabis that are currently controlling our pharmaceutical system. And if we go to legalization right now and allow the people that are controlling the cannabis industry right now to be the people that have that opportunity, they're going to do everything they can to recreate that system. They're going to do everything to lobby to keep other people out of the marketplace and for them to maintain their market share, unfortunately. So we got a lot of work to do before we can legalize or do, I think, the research that we all want to see done.
If I may, I could not echo his sentiments more. Education without information, yes, finally. Education without information, which we won't get without legalization, is basically, it's lack of it. And it is really a chicken and egg situation. I mean, we collect information. Our whole mandate and mission is literally to educate. Unfortunately, if the stakeholders are not willing to share their information, if the state doesn't mandate or at least encourage that share of information, then those of us who are trying to educate and share good intelligence doesn't have anything to work with. So yes, well, I think your sentiments are in the right place. Unfortunately, legalization is likely the catalyst to accomplish what you speak of.
Thanks so much for a great discussion. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope you all did too.
Caroline Phillips couldn't be here to say goodbye to everyone. She's obviously got a big day tomorrow, but just wanted to end and thank y'all for coming to the National Cannabis Policy Summit. This is why I've come out here the last 4 years instead of staying in Denver, because frankly, I'm tired of stereotypes being perpetuated in Denver. People getting baked in the grass and throwing trash everywhere isn't the kind of cannabis industry I want to see. So I love the week of activism, advocacy, entrepreneurship, and all of that comes along with the National Cannabis Festival and now the Policy Summit. And I hope to see y'all out at the RFK Fairgrounds tomorrow. So thanks for coming.
at the LA Times Festival of Books. Then from the Virginia Festival of Books, a discussion about American music and social movements.
Turn that off. Thank you, C-SPAN. What's up, everybody? Didn't want Beatles to get a copyright claim on me because the part 2 did. One little brief thing of help, and they threw a copyright blocked up on it because I didn't catch it soon enough. Motherfuckers. Sorry, my French. Hello, holy cannabis oil. How are you? Good to hear you, see you, and that you're going to be up at Hippie Hill tomorrow. Happy pre-420, everybody. Rushing this close real quick. We've been checking in all day through the streams with the National Cannabis Summit Part 2. Hopefully we'll be back up in a second as soon as I get help out of there. But anyway, join us tomorrow or subscribe, get notifications, because we'll be checking in tomorrow all day from wherever. We're going to go to a brunch in the morning. We're going to do some stuff. Who knows what we're going to do? It's going to be a surprise to everybody, including you guys. So check in with us tomorrow. Get notifications. We will go live for the holiday tomorrow. It is Green Friday, the day before 420. It is still a revolutionary act to smoke cannabis in public. You know what's going on up in Vancouver. If you don't, you should, because Liberté is no longer, it's still more illegal now that it's legal, folks. Hippie Hill will be hopping, though, with holy cannabis oil. Go say hello to him up there. And Chela's like, you want to drive up to San Francisco? I'm like, well, not really. A little too far because we got a brunch in the morning. So, but yeah, we'll check in. We'll do some stuff. So ring that bell and join us on Sunday for Reefer Revolution Live. Lots of news this week. It's happening this year, folks. Big news this week up on Capitol Hill. The states, decriminalization in Alabama. We've got Wisconsin, 4th time's a charm, going for recreational. Montana is looking at it again. 2019. You heard it here a year ago, folks, on Reefer Revolution Live, DC 420 LA, Cannabis 2019, Cannabis 2020. It's going to be the issue, top issue in the elections, and here it is. And if somebody on that panel, that last panel, said Donald Trump may sign legal cannabis in his presidency. So let's see what happens in the House. We know what's going to happen in the House. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to go to the House. It's not going to go past the House if it goes past the House. So it'll be an exercise in futility. What's that? No, I'm not talking about cannabis. I'm talking about impeachment is what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. You may be justified, but it ain't going anywhere. I mean, it's not going to get to the Senate. Please. You know, that's almost as likely as cannabis going through the Senate with Mitch McConnell. So although he is using hemp in his campaign ads for re-election, touting hemp as his big issue that he did. So we have, let's see, is this still cannabis? Oh, this is still cannabis. Let's go back to it. What the hell?
USC.
We're going to be leaving soon.
With that, Mr. Villaraigosa served 2 terms as mayor of Los Angeles from 2005 to 2013. Some rather challenging years, both in terms of the recession and some of the growth issues, and we'll be talking about some of that. Mr. Villaraigosa started his career, his professional life, his life in public service, as a community organizer, essentially. Somebody who, as a young man, during your high school years, was involved in social justice issues. We talked and have talked numerous times about everything with marching for farm workers and social justice issues here in the city of Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Teachers Union.
I don't think this is still Cannabis Summit. I think Cannabis Summit is over. This is Antonio Villaraigosa talking to somebody else about race, diversity, and politics. Don't really have time for that today, guys. It's an important issue. Antonio is a board member of MedMen. Interestingly enough, that's why I thought maybe it was continued to be part of it, but it's not. So we will depart. We will depart for the day. We will check in tomorrow. It's a different show. That's right. Be sure to check out our interview with Representative Tulsi Gabbard on the channel and the different of these panels as soon as we can get the Beatles music out of them. And we will see you on Sunday and checking in tomorrow. So love you guys. Free the plant, free the people.